have to take the first step.
Do you mind if I borrow the typewriter?
Hitler's halo has fallen. See the little man for what he is. A murderous charlatan.
Can you keep a secret?
Where'd you get this?
Found it. Found it where? In my typewriter. When the moment comes for us to stand up, may we stand.
I saw what was on that paper.
No one is safe. Not you. Not your family.
Careful, you never know who's watching.
I'm looking at a red leaflet which calls the Fury the great deceiver of the people. Let's not drag this out.
Are you trying to get us all killed?
The people deserve the truth.
Shut your mouth!
We can change things.
I was only telling the truth.
Love is what we're made of.
Remember me.
Welcome to Voiceover, Movies That Move Us. We talk to people of all kinds about the movies that made a mark, that led to cinematic epiphanies. And sometimes we do a bonus episode, and that's what we're doing today. I have with me Matt Whitaker, who is the writer, director, even producer of Truth Treason that just came out, is now in theaters. So welcome, Matt.
Thank you, Heather.
I'm so excited. Yeah. Okay, so well, let's go through your filmography, first of all. Your previous writing credits, Saints and Soldiers, 2003. A lot of people would see that as in the Mormon Cinema moment that we had. Yeah. Work in the Glory, 2 and 3. Also part of that movement. Messiah, the Lamb of God, TV series. The other thing I want to mention from your writing credits is Instrument of War, which is another World War II film. So I feel like you keep coming back to World War II. What is it about war films? What is it about World War II that really sort of interests you?
Yeah, I've always been fascinated by World War II especially, but war films. I went through a stint when I was in high school where it was Vietnam. But my dad was a World War II veteran.
Okay.
He was a bomber pilot in Europe.
Wow.
And so I grew up, hearing some of the stories. He didn't talk about them a lot, honestly, when I was younger. It was when he got older that finally he felt, for whatever reason, he felt comfortable sharing a lot of his stories, and I just couldn't get enough of it. And so I was just trying to get as much from my dad, this firsthand experience of what that was like. But I think because of that, I've always just been really interested in World War II stories. I feel like there are millions of stories that could be told, that could be shared. And especially in our medium, when you're trying to make a film and it costs millions of dollars to tell a story, you can only tell so many.
Right.
I tell as many as I can.
And I want to ask you a question, because a lot of people have referred to World War II as the last good war. Mm-hmm. Is that another reason that sort of you're attracted to it?
I think I used to think that.
Yeah.
I think, the last good war, meaning there was this feeling that there was good and there was evil, and it was really clear, who the bad guys were and who the good guys were.
Right.
And then when you would compare that to, it got kind of fuzzy in Korea, because was it a conflict? Was it a war? And then, of course, Vietnam was a much less, very, very complex war. And so I think that was, initially I kind of felt that way, kind of grew up with that perspective. This film, this story, and really diving into it for quite a few years, a couple decades, I think has helped me understand the complexity. I think from an American perspective, it makes sense to kind of look and see, well, obviously Hitler and what the Japanese were doing was the definition of evil, and so we're the good guys going over. It was actually when I was doing a documentary called Saints at War, another through BYU, which was an incredible experience, where we were interviewing and telling the stories of LDS veterans of World War II. most of whom that I interviewed were American, but I did interview some who were German, who served in Hitler's army, and even others, a couple that served in the Japanese army, were in the military there. And it was particularly with these German veterans who were Latter-day Saints, but getting their perspective on that really opened up my understanding, or was the beginning of really opening up my understanding of how complex even World War II was, particularly for those who were serving in Hitler's army. That I think it's easy for us to look back 80 plus years and kind of see things in black and white. Evil Gestapo, whatever,
Right.
evil Hitler, those things were true, and of course then the heroic resistance fighters are those who would have tried to stand up against that. And again, those things are true, but there was this really big gray area in the middle
Yeah.
where most Germans lived out their lives, whether they were Latter-day Saint or not, of course, and trying to make decisions and surrounded with propaganda and still trying to make decisions. And so, like I said, I think it's easy to look back and kind of maybe make some judgments that we shouldn't, or to look back and just really see it in black and white. But there was this gray area. I'm fascinated by that,
Right.
just as a person, but also as a storyteller and as a filmmaker. That kind of nuance, that kind of complexity, is just ripe for
Yeah.
for really good drama.
It is this fascinating look at, here you have a character, we should say his name, Helmuth Hubener, who is starting to notice these things. But we get the sense from the beginning of the movie that even he is, the thing that kind of bothers him is these bullies who are in the brown shirts, right?
Yeah.
The Hitler Youth, they're kind of obnoxious. But aside from that, he's hanging out with his friends. He's on a bike ride. He's having fun.
Yeah.
So that's interesting to me, the arc that you are sort of creating for us from I'm just living my life as a teenage boy to I'm firmly entrenched in this movement that I don't even know if I'm connected to other people. I'm just by myself doing this thing to stand up for what I believe in.
Yeah. And
there might be a question in there.
I heard one. I'm going to answer what I think it
All
was.
Right, yeah.
I was fascinated. The more I learned about Helmut, and we kind of, in the film, and I know you know this, but we kind of condensed time, a little bit. Some things that in Helmut's arc, took a number of years. We condensed them down, but he really was this young man, extremely bright. You could say on the Nazi fast track, because he was, as a 16-year-old, he'd been hired by the government to work at the city hall, as an intern,
right.
The youngest one that they had hired. So in one sense, he was moving down that track quickly, but he was seeing things. They had Jewish friends.
Yeah.
They had. It may have been their doctor, or something like that was Jewish. I bring that up as an example because that was Carl's thing. They had their family doctor was Jewish, and then he was gone,
disappeared.
Yeah, and so there would be questions like that: what happened to them? But also not just the Jews. So again, particularly with Helmut's experience in their little LDS branch in Hamburg. There was a member of the branch, a man named Heinrich Worps, who just happened. One day he was out on the street in Hamburg, and they were, I guess, dedicating a statue to one of the Nazi leadership, and he just kind of made a comment in passing that was derogatory about this. Somebody overheard it, turned him in, and he went to a camp, was sent away for I can't remember how long. It seems like about 6 months. Where he was tortured. And when he came back, he was a broken man. So Helmut was seeing, I remember what Brother Vorbs was like when he left, and then he came back just for saying something like that.
Yeah.
So Helmut was experiencing that, and that wasn't an uncommon experience for Germans. They were seeing what was happening. And as Carl told me once, seeing things tighten down and seeing things clamp down so that for a lot of people, by the time they really felt like, wait a minute, this is wrong, we need to say something, it was too late for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Which makes what Helmut did, I think, even more amazing.
Right. Because there are soldiers in the streets, and there is this expectation that any wrong placed foot is going to lead you to a camp.
To a camp, to some sort of jail, to a prison, a correctional
right.
facility, as they would call it.
So you've been working with this material for over 25 years. You did a documentary in 2002, Truth and Conviction, for PBS. So why keep coming back to this material? Why keep coming back to this material? Why didn't the documentary scratch the itch?
It's a great question. I thought that was going to be it. I met Carl in 2001. It's when I was doing the documentary Saints at War that one of the crew on that, Rick McFarland, also a BYU grad, asked me if I'd heard about Helmut Hubener. I hadn't, and he's the one who said, hey, I think that the last surviving member of his group is still alive. I think he lives up in Salt Lake. Wow. We should see if we can talk to him. We literally opened the phone book and looked up his name, called him up and asked if he would, if we could come over. And he said yes, and we did. And he shared. And that said, we went to his home that day in 2001, March of 2001, and he shared kind of the short version of the story.
Yeah.
And even that just blew me away. I just thought, I've got to make a documentary about this. We've got to tell this story. We filmed a more extensive interview with him on June 6th, 2001. It's an important date in World War II history.
Right.
And that became the spine for the documentary that we made. And it was while we were making the documentary, I had a really specific experience that to your point, kind of helped me to realize that this little documentary is something, but there's more, that there's more to this. Should I share that experience with you?
Oh, sure. Okay? Yeah.
We actually, while we were filming, we took Carl with us. Carl and I became dear friends, it's one of the greatest gifts of my life. And we flew over to Germany together and visited, some of his old stomping grounds, and also like some of the cells that he and Helmut and Rudy were held in after they were captured were still in existence. And we walked into one of those cells with Carl that he had been held in 60-something years earlier.
Oh, my gosh.
And it was really interesting because he went in for a couple minutes. He knew we had the cameras rolling, and so I think he was doing it for us. But after a couple minutes, he just said, I've got to get out.
Right.
Even then, that many years later, it was still, that heavy for him, understandably. But another place that we went while we were filming for the documentary was we went to the site of Helmut's execution, which is now a national memorial. It's at the prison where he was held, which is still a functioning prison. It's a really old prison, but that part of it has been walled off, and it's a national memorial where Helmut was executed, and about 2,000, almost 3,000 other resistance fighters or those who stood up to Hitler. And we were there with Carl. It's really a sacred space. You step into that chamber where it happened, and you can just feel it. And we were there with Carl, and we were filming with him. And while we were filming, there was a busload of teenagers that pulled up, like a high school field trip with their teacher. And they came out, and they were kind of wandering around the site and looking at it. And one of my crew pulled the teacher aside, and on the wall at this, there was a little photo of Helmut and Carl and Rudy as teenagers. And he pointed to the 17-year-old Carl in the photo and then pointed over to the real Carl, who was in his late 70s at the time, and said to the teacher, "That's him." And the teacher, his jaw dropped, and he immediately gathered his students around Carl and just said, "Tell us your story."
Oh, wow.
And I was watching the kids. I was watching the teenagers as they were hearing what he was doing when he was their age. And I was seeing that it was impacting them, that they were, I could see the tears in their eyes. I could see that it was getting through to these teenagers, getting past the piercings and the tattoos, if you will,
right.
and really getting to them. And that for me was the seed, I think, of when I started to realize this is a story that needs to go beyond this little PBS documentary. This is a story that really could appeal and needs to be heard by a worldwide audience, and specifically with the rising generation. And so it was not long after that, in 2002, when I started writing very, very early drafts of a script for a narrative for a feature version of it.
So that's, okay, I have to say a couple of things. One is with a feature film, you get to do things like, we're going to set up the best cinematography in the world. Like, one of the things I loved about this film was how gorgeous it looks. To me, in some ways, I'm like, oh, it's like kind of like The Third Man. Like, I had like these.
Thank you. Yeah.
I had these films come to mind as I was watching it. What's the Steven Spielberg? There's
Bridge of Spies.
Bridge of Spies.
Yeah,
That came to mind. I was like,
Yes.
I love what we're doing with fog and the streets, and it's really a great opportunity that you make the most of.
The cinematography. So our cinematographer, Bianca Klein, also a BYU grad.
Yeah.
And it's really cool for me that back when we shot that very first interview with Karl-Heinz Schnibe on June 6th, 2001, Brian Wilcox, who was the cinematographer at the LDS Motion Picture Studio, was our cinematographer on that. But there was a film student who was working as a film loader on that day, and that was Bianca.
Oh, wow.
And so to come full circle all these years later, where she came on and of course she's now just has an incredible resume, this amazing cinematographer. But I can remember when I reached out to her to hope that she would consider shooting this film. But I was honest with her. I said, "Look, this isn't going to be something that will get you nominated." I think is the way I put it. I don't want a beautiful film. I want it to feel gritty. I want it to feel real. I want it to feel like it was shot on film, even though we were going to shoot it digitally. And yet, and I think she accomplished all those things. And yet, it is so amazingly beautiful in its grittiness. And the way she used fog and light. Again, thematically also, that was very important, and we talked a lot about that and looked at a lot of films together. But I'm just so pleased with what Bianca Klein did on this film.
What do you think, since you've worked on this film for over 25 years, how do you think the film would have been different if you'd been able to release this in 2005 instead of 2025?
I think it would have been a very different film. It's interesting because this has been such a long journey to make it. And of course, I've grown as a storyteller and as a filmmaker in the process. My partners at Kaleidoscope, Russ Kendall and John Foss, also, we've all kind of grown as filmmakers in this. And the script, which I co-wrote with Ethan Vincent, another BYU grad. This is we've had this time to kind of refine it and make it better and better. I think if we would have shot something in 2005 or in 2007 and 2008 when we got really close and we had an Academy Award nominated actor to star in it, with Haley Joel Osment, and we had Max von Sydow attached to play the judge and everything, I think that we would have made a really good film in 2005. And I think we made something so much better this many years later. Not just because I think I'm just a better filmmaker, a better storyteller. I think that just the cast that we were able to get, for one thing. It's interesting, when we were on set shooting, and my wife, who was on set with us, was talking to the young actor we cast as Helmut, this young British actor, Ewan Horrocks, who is incredible and was a gift. When you're casting this kind of a thing, you want all the cast, of course, to be excellent, but the kid playing Helmut has got to carry this thing,
right?
And when you're casting young actors, that's there are a lot of questions. Are we going to be able to find that? And we did with Ewan. And my wife was telling him that Matt started writing this script back in 2002. And he said, that's the year I was born. He said, you just had to wait long enough until I could play this. And I said, absolutely, totally worth it.
Right.
So as I look at the young actors that we cast, as I look at the Gestapo agent, and Rupert Evans, incredible actor. Even as I look at, and again, just to be candid, Max von Sydow was one of my favorite actors in the world. And so when we had him attached to play the judge, I just, that for me meant so much. And when the project didn't come together in time, and he had to to pull out, that was a really, really tough time for me. And then we cast this actor that most Americans don't know, an actor named Dominic Maffam, who's just an incredible character actor, a British character actor. So good. And I actually had to admit, it's like, I'm glad it's him.
Right.
The time was right. The cast was right. The way we told the story, I think there is a certain timeliness, which I'm sure we can talk about. There's a certain timeliness now to this story coming out when it has. This is a really long-winded answer, but I'm able to say honestly now that I'm grateful that it took as long as it has to take to make. Even though there were plenty of times during that where I was, raising my fist to heaven saying, why is this taking so long?
You were originally working on this when what we call Mormon Cinema was sort of a big thing. And I can describe it for you as a film scholar. Like, this was a series of or a group of directors who are all making films, coming out different genres, different approaches. We've got Richard Dutcher, who kind of starts this all off with God's Army. People are going to put Napoleon Dynamite in there, right? Like, there's a whole bunch of different films that are happening, and it all seemed to blossom. And then it kind of tapered off, and a lot of those directors have gone on to make other things, not necessarily what we would think of as Mormon or Latter-day Saint films. Here we are 20 years later. Do you think of your film, Truth and Treason, as part of that? Or has that movement kind of died and now we're thinking about a different kind of phase in production of Latter-day Saint stories?
Yeah, it's interesting because I've never really felt like this was a Latter-day Saint story.
Yeah.
I've never felt like it was a faith-based film at all, any more than I would say Schindler's List is a faith-based film.
Sure.
Which of course has incredible religious elements to it, and there is some of that in this. These boys were Mormon boys, and that's pretty cool. Especially for those of us who are LDS. But it wasn't about that, and never has been for me. Even when I wrote the first Saints and Soldiers film, for me that wasn't. I think that helped to get the film greenlit and funded. The fact that it was in that little moment of what the Mormon Cinema moment. But when I wrote it, that's never been. It was not that wasn't even in my mind. Right. Actually, that, and in this one, of course, it never has been. It was very intentional and important to us not to hide the fact that they were Mormon. I think that's a really interesting part of the story. And in some ways, Helmut, I think that it may have motivated, some of Helmut's motivation may have been influenced by what he was hearing at church and learning, as a young LDS person in Nazi Germany. But and so I think it's really interesting to see the branch president, who in the film we call him a bishop, but he was a branch president, who was, a very faithful member of the church. And I talked to, I think, just about everybody who was still alive back in the early 2000s who knew him personally, including all three of his sons. And now I've talked and met his grandchildren. And he was a very faithful, good member of the church, a good man, also a real believer in the Nazi agenda. And those two things going together, I think, is really interesting to look at.
Okay, let's talk about this. Yeah. Because when I heard about this film, I got worried, knowing what I do know about sort of how Latter-day Saint audiences want to be portrayed, right? This is something that we see in minority cinema, right, where, okay, you're going to make this movie that a bunch of people on the outside are going to see about us, make us look good. And that's not just Latter-day Saints. That's, Hindu communities. That's, Muslim communities. Please make us look good to the outside folks.
Sure.
And I was worried that there was going to be sort of this, papering over
whitewashing of it.
the diversity of opinions and actions, and the fact that so many members, right, were just trying to get by in Nazi Germany. They're not going to raise their heads. They're going to do what they need to do to kind of live their lives. And then there were the members who were like, oh no, this goes right along with this Nazi propaganda is exactly what I love about the church, right? And are going to sort of, kind of braid those belief systems together. So I was a little nervous.
How'd I do?
I think you did a really good job because you can see the sincerity of that bishop. That bishop really does believe these two different, what I see as conflicting, right, thought systems, systems of belief coming together. He believes that they go together. And then there are people around him, right, like the one counselor in the bishopric who's like,
yes.
no.
Yes.
We're not going to do that.
Yeah.
We're not going to bring, this political, speech into our, and then we have Helmut himself. So I feel like that I was relieved, and I was glad that we could see all these different actors, and I mean that not as,
Yes.
but different actors trying to work out what is the church teaching me, what is the gospel teaching me, and how do I understand this political philosophy?
Yeah, and I feel like what we presented, which happens to take place, in a Mormon community there, really is a microcosm of what was happening in most religions in Nazi Germany. They were trying to navigate that, and some did better than others, and most of the time it was complex, and including within our faith.
Yeah.
That it was complex. I was it was very important to me to be as honest as I felt like we could be and what I had learned from first person accounts about what Arthur Zander was like. And what his motivations may have been.
I just want to talk about, when I was watching the film, I saw it last week in a theater at lunchtime. And I actually had a lot of emotions around what I know the history to be of Germany, right? Like I kept thinking, oh my gosh, it's 1941. In 1945, what are these cities going to look like? And the Russians coming back. And, the U.S. comes through. They're fairly humane compared to what...
Comparatively, yes.
Yeah,
really, they were very
humane.
Yeah.
But what the Russians are going to do to Germany as payback for what Germany did to Russia, right? And 1945, there's all these people moving back and forth across borders. I don't know if anyone knows this. There's a great big book called 1945. It's a piece of nonfiction. More people died in 1945 and 1946 and 1947, civilians, than died during the war because of starvation and disease and fights. Like, you're living in my house. Well, it's my house now. No, it's not. People, And I just had this sorrow well up in me as I watch these people who are in this difficult position trying to make a decision about what is the best thing. Also connected to this realization that Helmuth is putting his congregation at great risk, right? He's using all these resources from the church, right? He's using the typewriter, he's using the mimeograph, and whether or not that's factually accurate, whatever. But I'm just...
It was factually accurate.
Okay, yeah. And just feeling like, oh my gosh, all the danger these people are in, not just right now, but the results of the after effects of the Nazi regime and basically the global community coming in and correcting for the Nazi regime are going to be devastating on these people. Yeah. So I don't know if you intended us to think about that, but I've
got plenty to say about that.
Go ahead.
When you look at what Helmut was writing as a 16-year-old, we have 29 of his leaflets that survived, only because the Gestapo kept really good records and archived them. And there's an amazing, I think, miraculous story about how they survived the war. But we have 29 leaflets of the many more that he did write. And if you read those and you see, that's what Helmut's saying in 41, when at a time when Germany was dominating.
Right.
And he's saying, we're going to lose this war, and we're going to lose badly, and this is why. And he was laying out, and of course, a lot of that he was learning from the BBC broadcasts that were coming, but also you can see where he's putting two and two together. He's realizing fuel we're gonna run out of fuel. Germany doesn't have its own, and he was seeing things that were happening. If you look at what Helmut is predicting in his leaflets, and then you can just see, to your point, what happened in 45.
Right.
And even before that, just point after point after point, he was right, which is, I think, incredible.
Yeah.
I'll add to that just a personal, for Helmut, a personal tragedy. He was, and there's no spoilers in this, right? Everybody, we're assuming people, they better have seen the film.
Or go see it.
Or go see it. Yes, he was executed on October 27th, 1942. In the film, you get to meet his mother, and I even in the film version, I love her arc as she becomes a stronger person.
Yeah.
Through that. In the series, we get to know so much more about her. Really powerful, complex story. But about 8 months after Helmut was executed, she was killed in the bombings of Hamburg. In 43, that summer, Hamburg was just obliterated, and she and her mother both were killed in those bombings. And I just look at that and I think, her son was trying to, he didn't know it, I'm sure didn't know he was trying to save his mom's life.
Yeah.
In trying to warn the people, this is what's coming.
Right. This, I want to talk a little bit about Sophie Scholl, The Last Days, was released in 2005. It's a similar story. Sophie Scholl and her brother were part of the White Rose in Munich. This is going to happen in 1943, and they are going to be executed for dispersing leaflets against the fascist government. And that film has always moved me because of the way in that movie, Sophie Scholl, she's writing letters and she is uttering prayers to God about her situation. Now, the plot is different in that she's almost immediately taken into custody. And so most of the film is like her interrogation with a Nazi officer. It's interesting to me that you say you don't think of this film as part of Mormon cinema or as a Mormon movie. And I would say, in fact, it's got so much in common with the Sophie Scholl film because of the lives of the historical figures.
Yeah.
So do you see your film actually becoming part of another kind of genre of film, whether that's the leaflet subgenre, or is there like some other genre that you see your film fitting into?
Maybe I overstated. I don't want to distance this from being like part of Mormon cinema. I'm so proud to be a person of faith, a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who's able to tell a story about another group of people who were also members of my same faith, who did something really brave. It's really complex, but did something really brave. And that was my initial draw to this story. So I don't want to say, this isn't, it's not that I don't want this to be part of, seen as a Mormon story, because, from a certain perspective it is. And that's beautiful. It just has never, to me, it's always been so much broader than that. And so, I love the Sophie Scholl film, and there's a certain beautiful simplicity to that and a beautiful imagery that film uses. The fact that this one has a lot of similarities in some sense. Another young, peaceful resistance fighter believed in the maybe perhaps there's a certain naive belief at that time that the power of the written word could create an uprising,
right?
Which in that case it did not.
Yeah.
But it doesn't weaken the sincerity of their causes, both of them. This film, I love the fact that not only is he another young resistance fighter that preceded the White Rose?
Right.
And in fact, we can talk about it if you'd like, but there is some evidence that
really?
they knew of them and were perhaps in part inspired by what Helmut had done. But also the fact that it was a Mormon kid who did this. I just think that's, as a Mormon kid grown up, as a 16-year-old,
Yeah.
when I was a 16-year-old, I wasn't anywhere near what Helmut is cognitively or in courage or anything like that. But I love that there is an example for my kids and for young Latter-day Saints growing up. That's great.
Yeah. So you're going to portray not only Latter-day Saints in a film, but you're going to portray German Latter-day Saints. Were there additional things that you wanted to take into account for? Especially, I know that the film's going to have a German premiere, or already has had a German.
It will have it in December 4th. Yeah, it's opening in Germany.
So when you, as an American, are writing this, what are other things that you're trying to keep in mind when you're creating these characters and sort of laying out this historical film? This
is where my writing partner on this, Ethan Vincent, who was raised in Austria and Germany. He's perfectly fluent in both languages, but is more, he lives there now. He's raising his family in Austria, in Vienna. And he brought really a perspective that I couldn't have as growing up as an American. He really brought that and an understanding, and having grown up in the education system over there of how they were taught about World War II. And
from what I understand, they're quite open about the atrocities of the Nazis.
Oh, very, very much so.
Yeah.
And it's I think it's so admirable the way that Germany specifically has. It's dangerous for an American to talk about it this way, but has really taken ownership of what happened. And has done everything that they can to make sure that it would never happen again.
Yeah.
And that perspective, I think, really in the script. And Ethan Vincent was with us every single day of the shoot as well, as we were, actually putting these things on, on films.
Yeah.
And so his perspective, I think, really informed the German life, whether they're Latter-day Saints or not, just that German perspective.
What do you think the LDS audience is looking for when they go to a movie with a Latter-day Saint? I sort of said what I was worried about, right? Like whitewashing the truth. But what do you think a Latter-day Saint audience is looking for when they go see a movie that they know is going to have a Latter-day Saint character in it?
This is a generalization, but I think it depends on the generation.
Okay.
I think that boomers and some of us older Gen Xers who were raised really when the church was best foot forward. We just really just want to put our best foot forward. I think that a lot of them come to it hoping to see just only the best parts of these Latter-day Saints, and only seeing them at their best, and not seeing any of the nuance or the complexity or the warts, if you will. I think that the millennials, and especially Gen Z, there's a shift. I think there's a major shift in the way that younger Latter-day Saints not only think that we should be seen, but want to be seen. Instead of just best foot forward, it's both feet forward.
Yeah.
And let's see that, and let's be real, and let's be honest with that. And so I think that when the and I say younger now, millennials are now in their 40s.
Yes. The kids I used to babysit are almost grandparents.
Yes. But when those generations of Latter-day Saints go to a film to see a film about some Mormons or whatever, I think that they're expecting and hoping for something that's just honest, and that does reflect the nuance that they know that their life reflects. And I hope that that's what they're finding in this film. I've been really it's been gratifying to get the feedback we've been getting, specifically from the Jello Belt, if you will, of really appreciating to see this kid who who does, incredibly brave things, with a bishop who's really complex and maybe hard for us to get our head around.
Yeah.
By the way, in the series, we go even deeper into that. I think I mentioned that, into his decision-making process. I think that they appreciate that. I hope that they do. I know that I do.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that you felt like the movie will resonate even more with audiences today. So talk to me about that.
20 plus years ago when we were just trying to start getting this film made, I can remember having conversations with my producing partners saying, man, it is so timely right now. This film has to come out,
Yeah.
That was nothing. As I look at where we are today, and if we're in a spin-free zone here,
Sure.
I can just be really honest. I've been very careful and intentional for years about the way that I talk about the timeliness of this film, because I really do believe that this story transcends party politics. I think it's time to say that I feel like what's happening not only in the world but in our country transcends party politics. A few weeks ago, just before the film opened, Bianca Klein, our cinematographer, and I were sitting down to watch it by ourselves in a theater kind of one last time to make sure everything was as it should be. And Bianca asked if she could bring a friend. And she brought this woman who I met just briefly beforehand. I heard a little accent, but I didn't get a chance to talk to her. We watched the film together, and her friend at the end just broke down. And I've seen people like begin weeping at the end. It's a very powerful ending.
Yeah.
But she really kind of lost her composure, just really broke down. And while she was trying to regain her composure, Bianca just quietly said to me, she's from Ukraine. Mm. And then I understood maybe a little bit more. But after she was able to kind of get her composure, she said, it's not just about what's happening in my country. It's about what's happening in this country. And that really struck me from her perspective. And then living here right now and seeing what's happening, this is just a movie.
Yeah.
That's one way to look at it, and I do believe that. But I do feel like the story that this film tells at a time right now, I think that there is a timeliness to it, and I hope that it might have some sort of small impact to help us stand up and say what needs to be said, as Helmut did in his sermon when he talked about the fact that Jesus is a revolutionary. But also that he was filled with grace and truth. Yeah. He was loving and kind, but he said what needed to be said. And I think that's an important example right now.
So glad I got a chance to talk to Matt Whitaker about his movie Truth and Treason. It's available in theaters now, but you can also stream a 4-part series on Angel Studios' platform. Dive deep into the historical context and the motivations of the different characters while also enjoying that gorgeous cinematography. If you're interested in going back to see some of those Mormon Cinema greats that we mentioned, can I recommend 3 films? One is Richard Dutcher's Brigham City. It's a serial killer film right in Utah. Great performances, tight little thriller, incredibly well done. I think you should also check out New York Doll, which is a documentary from Greg Whiteley and is about a rock musician who joins the Latter-day Saints and then wants to get the band back together again. And lastly, The Errand of Angels is from Christian Visa, and it's about sister missionaries, young women who are missionaries for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Europe, facing a bunch of people who aren't really that interested in Christianity. It hit home for me when I saw it about 10 years after my own mission. We hope you love the show today. Voiceover is produced by BYU Radio and edited by Spencer Boyer. Special thanks to Heidi Cleff and Kip Merrill for today's episode. I'm your host, Heather Bigley.